somewhere in Jeddah, behind walled compounds guarded by royal security, 4 princesses of Saudi Arabia reportedly recorded messages on phones they had managed to access, describing irregular food deliveries and denied medical care. Their father controlled an estimated fortune tied to one of the wealthiest monarchies on earth. He had married reportedly around 30 women across his lifetime and fathered over 35 children. He opened the kingdom's first coeducational university. He announced that Saudi women could vote. His name was Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, King of Saudi Arabia. And according to his own daughters, he confined them for years. 2 of them would reportedly die in that confinement. The recordings are grainy. The audio quality is poor. The kind of compressed, unsteady sound you get from a phone held close to a mouth in a room with limited ventilation, where the speaker does not know how long the connection will last. These are not recordings made by political dissidents operating from foreign safe houses or activists staging managed campaigns from positions of legal protection. These are recordings reportedly made by daughters of the reigning king of Saudi Arabia, women whose surname alone should have guaranteed access to the finest hospitals in the Middle East, the most protected residences money could construct, and the widest personal freedoms that a fortune measured in the hundreds of billions could buy anywhere on the planet. Instead, the recordings describe walls, guards posted at gates, food that arrived when someone in the royal household's administrative chain decided it should arrive, not when the women inside needed it. Medical requests that reportedly went unanswered for weeks, then months. And compounds in Jeddah that had once been residences appropriate for a king's children, but had allegedly deteriorated year by year into something far closer to detention facilities, maintained not by the Saudi prison system, not by the courts, not by any formal legal process, but by the private security apparatus of the royal household itself. The woman whose voice appears most frequently in these recordings is Princess Sahar bint Abdullah. Born reportedly around 1971, Sahar was the eldest of 4 daughters. King Abdullah had with his ex-wife, Alanoud Al-Fayez. The other 3 were Maha, reportedly born around 1972, Hala, born reportedly around 1974, and Jawaher, the youngest, born reportedly around 1976. 4 daughters. 4 women born inside the wealthiest monarchy on the surface of the earth. And according to their own accounts and their mother's repeated public testimony across multiple international media outlets, all 4 were confined in royal compounds in Jeddah for years. According to their mother, Sahar and Jawaher held in one compound, Maha and Hala in another, cut off from independent income, independent movement, independent medical care, and sustained contact with the world beyond the compound gates. Their mother told Channel 4 News in 2014 that her daughters were in a terrible state. She said they were hanging on to life. To understand how that is even structurally possible, how 4 adult women in the 21st century could be held inside properties their own family owned, in a city with international airports and foreign embassies, without any criminal charge, court order, or legal proceeding. You have to understand 2 things. The first is the marriage that started everything. The second is the system that enforced it. Alanoud Al-Fayez has described herself as approximately 15 years old when she married Abdullah bin Abdulaziz. She was born in 1957, the daughter of Sheikh Daham bin Dada al-Bakhit al-Fayez, from the Al-Fayez clan of the Bani Sakher, one of Jordan's most prominent tribal families. Abdullah was born on the 1st of August 1924. They married in 1972 when he was about 48 years old. The age gap between bride and groom was over 30 years. She was 15. He was approaching 50. It was a marriage arranged by her uncle, and according to Alanoud, she had never laid eyes on Abdullah until their wedding day. A teenage girl from a Jordanian noble clan, and a man who had already spent decades accumulating political power within the Al Saud hierarchy, joined in a union built not on personal compatibility, but on tribal alliance, political positioning, and the internal logic of a royal family that treated marriage the way other institutions treat mergers. This was not unusual within the Al Saud system. The family had used marriage as a political and tribal instrument for generations, binding clans, consolidating regional loyalty, and producing heirs across dozens of simultaneous and sequential unions. Abdullah reportedly married around 30 women over the course of his lifetime, though never more than 4 simultaneously in accordance with Islamic law. Wives could be divorced and replaced. Family branches could be elevated or discarded depending on political need, tribal calculation, and the shifting dynamics of a royal household that functioned less like a Western nuclear family and more like a political coalition held together by blood, money, protocol, and the understanding that access to the king meant access to everything. Alanoud bore Abdullah 4 daughters, no sons. In a system where male heirs carried the weight of dynastic succession, where the kingship passed between brothers and eventually to sons, 4 daughters from one wife represented a branch without succession leverage, without political currency, and without the kind of structural protection that the Al Saud system extended to those whose bloodlines could produce future rulers. Abdullah reportedly soured on Alanoud because of their inability to produce a male heir. The branch was, by the internal calculus of the family, dispensable. The daughters initially led a privileged childhood. According to Channel 4 News, there were skiing trips in the Alps and visits abroad. They lived, for a time, as princesses were expected to live, inside a system of extraordinary material comfort, protected by the family's wealth and status and reputation. That made what came next harder to comprehend. When Alanoud and Abdullah divorced in 2003 and she left for London, the consequences of that departure did not fall on her alone. Alanoud has told interviewers that she tried to use legal channels and private appeals to the king before going public. She said she tried reasoning with him. After all, he was the father of her children, but her efforts had no effect. What happened instead, according to her account and the daughter's own later testimony, was that the 4 girls were not permitted to follow their mother out of Saudi Arabia. They remained in the kingdom. According to their mother, Sahar and Jawaher had been held since approximately 2001, even before the divorce was finalized. The compounds in Jeddah, once family residences within the vast portfolio of Al Saud properties, became the sites of what the daughters would later describe as confinement. Not a transition to smaller homes, not a reduction in household staff. Confinement, guards at the exits, restrictions on who could enter, restrictions on communication, restrictions on medical access. A life defined not by the privileges of royal birth, but by the absolute authority of a father who was also a king. From skiing trips in the Alps to guarded compounds. From privileged childhood to indefinite confinement. The distance between those 2 realities is the measure of the entire story. The mechanism that made this possible was not a prison sentence, not a court ruling, and not any instrument a legal system recognizable to most of the world would produce. It was the Saudi male guardianship system, known in Arabic as wilaya. Under this system, a woman in Saudi Arabia required her male guardian's permission for nearly every significant act of adult life. Travel required permission. Obtaining a passport required permission. Marriage required permission. In practice, even medical treatment could require a guardian's involvement or approval. Employment, housing, and financial transactions could all be constrained by the guardian's authority. The guardian was typically a father, husband, brother, or son. For Sahar, Maha, Jawaher, and Hala, their guardian was their father. Their father was Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. And Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud was, from 2005 until his death in 2015, the King of Saudi Arabia, with all the unchecked executive authority that title carried. This is the structural trap the entire story turns on. Abdullah was not merely a controlling father restricting his children's movement out of personal anger. He was the sovereign of a kingdom where his personal authority and the legal authority of the state converged into a single, undivided point of control. There was no independent court to appeal to. There was no judicial review process that could override a guardian's decision when that guardian was the head of state. The guardianship system was not an informal cultural tradition subject to interpretation. It was embedded in law, administered by bureaucracy, and backed by the full institutional weight of the state. Human Rights Watch documented its effects across Saudi society in extensive reporting, describing a framework in which adult women were treated as legal dependents of their male relatives, regardless of their age, education, employment, or professional standing. The conservative kingdom maintained a system under which women could not make decisions about their lives without approval from a father, husband, brother, or even a son, including decisions regarding travel, work, healthcare, education, and business affairs. For the four princesses specifically, guardianship meant that their father's decision to restrict their movement, their travel, their medical access, and their contact with the outside world was not merely enforceable within Saudi legal architecture. It was, within that architecture, entirely ordinary. The system did not need to be bent or broken to trap them. It functioned exactly as designed. And here is where the story becomes almost unbearable in its contradiction. In 2009, King Abdullah opened the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, known as KAUST, on a sprawling campus in Thual, on the Red Sea coast. It was the kingdom's first coeducational university. Male and female students studied side by side. International faculty members were recruited from leading institutions around the world. The campus was designed as a showcase of Saudi modernity, intellectual ambition, and openness to global standards of education. Billions of dollars were invested. More than 60 world leaders attended the opening ceremony. The world praised Abdullah as a reformer, a king pushing a conservative kingdom toward a more progressive future. 2 years later, in September of 2011, he announced that Saudi women would be permitted to vote and to run as candidates in municipal elections, a change that was formally implemented in December of 2015. He also announced that women would be appointed to the Shura Council, the kingdom's highest advisory body, for the first time. Western governments, international organizations, and editorial boards around the world celebrated the decisions as historic steps forward for women's rights in the kingdom. While those announcements were being made, while the speeches were being delivered, and the cameras were rolling, and the international community was applauding, reportedly his own 4 daughters could not leave their compounds in Jeddah. They could not board a plane. They could not see a doctor without permission that was not being granted. They could not vote. They could not attend a university. They could not do any of the things that their father was publicly promising to make possible for millions of other Saudi women. The overlap in dates is not a coincidence, and it is not incidental context. It is the engine of the entire documentary. The same king who stood before the world and declared that Saudi women deserve greater participation in public life was, according to his own children's testimony, presiding over a household in which 4 women had been stripped of participation in any life at all. The reforms were real. Caste exists today. Women did vote in 2015. 20 women won seats in those municipal elections. Millions of Saudi women experienced incremental but meaningful expansions of their legal rights during and after Abdullah's reign. And the 4 daughters reportedly experienced none of it. The kingdom changed around them. The compounds did not. Inside those compounds, according to the accounts given by Sahar through her recordings and social media posts, and corroborated in broad terms by Alanoud's interviews from London, daily life had deteriorated over the years. Food deliveries were reportedly irregular, not because of supply chain failures in a kingdom that imports food by the shipload, but reportedly because the administrative machinery controlling the compounds simply did not prioritize consistent provisioning. A motion tabled in the United Kingdom's Parliament stated that Sahar and Jawaher had been denied access to food for more than 60 days and had limited access to water. The properties were allegedly falling into physical disrepair. Maintenance, like everything else, required authorization from a system that had no incentive to maintain residences, housing people it had chosen to forget. Princess Maha was described in her mother's accounts as suffering from serious health conditions that went insufficiently treated or entirely untreated for extended periods. Princess Hala, according to the OHCHR record and subsequent reporting, was also reportedly ill and deprived of appropriate treatment. The medical infrastructure of Saudi Arabia is extensive. The kingdom operates world-class hospitals. The resources existed. The problem was never capability. The problem was permission. The guardianship system meant that access to medical care required authorization from the person who had allegedly ordered the confinement in the first place. The lock and the key were held by the same hand. Armed guards were reportedly stationed at the exits. According to the daughters' accounts, these were not police officers operating under a warrant, not corrections staff administering a sentence, and not military personnel following a judicial order. They were described as royal security personnel, members of the protective apparatus that normally shielded members of the Al Saud family from external threats, from kidnapping, from assassination, from unauthorized approach. The same infrastructure designed to keep danger away from the royal family had reportedly been turned inward, repurposed to keep 4 members of that family from walking through their own front gates. Sahar sent photographs of the compound to Channel 4 News, including images of what she described as a surveillance tower that watched them day and night. 3,000 miles away across the Mediterranean and most of Europe, Alanoud Al-Fayez was living in London. A former wife of the King of Saudi Arabia, settled in a Western capital, giving interviews to any media outlet that would listen. She gave what was described as her first television interview to Channel 4 News in March of 2014. She spoke to RT, she spoke to Vice News. She spoke to journalists from multiple Western newspapers and appealed for help from foreign governments, including from the President of the United States. In those interviews, she described herself as a mother who had been separated from her children for over a decade, unable to reach them by phone for years at a stretch, unable to visit, unable to use any legal channel available to her to compel access. She described the marriage to Abdullah in stark personal terms: her age at the time, the power imbalance, the impossibility of challenging a reigning monarch from within a system designed to make challenge impossible. She said things nobody knew. She said her daughters did not make the problems. She did by leaving. It was her choice. And the punishment fell on them. Alanoud's campaign was, in one sense, remarkably effective. International media covered the story. Human rights organizations referenced the daughter's case in broader analyses of the guardianship system. The United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights received a formal communication detailing allegations of ill treatment, neglect, inadequate medical care, and restricted movement against all 4 princesses. A motion was tabled in the British Parliament expressing deep concern that Sahar and Jawaher had been denied food for more than 60 days. For a brief period between roughly 2012 and 2014, the confinement of 4 of Abdullah's daughters became an internationally known story, covered by major outlets across multiple continents. The contradiction was too sharp to ignore. A king celebrated as a champion of women's rights, allegedly confining his own daughters. But media coverage did not translate into freedom. Alanoud could speak from London. She could not act in Jeddah. She could describe the situation to millions of viewers and readers around the world. But she could not enter the compounds, override the guardianship system, or compel any member of the vast Al Saud family to intervene. Her freedom to speak was genuine. Her powerlessness to change anything was equally genuine. And according to Alanoud, drawing international attention may have made things worse. She told interviewers that after the daughters went public with their story, King Abdullah reportedly stopped the women's rare trips outside the compound to buy food and medicine. The tool of visibility became another instrument of punishment. It is also essential to hold what the viewer does not have. The Saudi government never issued a detailed public response to the daughters' claims or their mother's allegations. When the Saudi government did acknowledge the situation at all, the response attributed to King Abdullah was that it was a private matter. That characterization, a private matter, is itself a piece of evidence. It confirmed that the royal family viewed the confinement of 4 adult women as a domestic affair beyond the reach of public accountability, international concern, or institutional review. Alanoud's account and the daughter's own recordings represent one side of a family dispute in which the other side chose not to engage publicly with specifics. The allegations are serious, specific, and consistent across multiple accounts over several years. The absence of a detailed public rebuttal does not confirm every claim, nor does it disprove them. What it does confirm is that the Al Saud family's internal code prioritized silence over engagement, even when the cost of that silence was an international narrative that went essentially uncontested. Then the daughters themselves broke the family's silence from inside. In 2014, Princess Sahar began posting on social media and communicating directly with journalists, including sending photographs and emails to Channel 4 News. She recorded audio messages. She described her situation in her own words, from inside the compound, using platforms that the Saudi government was simultaneously attempting to monitor and control in its broader campaign against political dissent. A princess of the royal family was using the same digital tools that activists and dissidents used to challenge state authority. Except she was not challenging a distant government. She was challenging her own father. She had become, in effect, a dissident within her own household. Using the internet to bypass the walls, the guards, the guardianship system, and the family's code of silence. The recordings and messages she produced are the closest thing to primary documentary evidence the outside world possesses. In them, a princess of Saudi Arabia describes conditions that no amount of royal protocol, dynastic loyalty, or cultural context can make sound acceptable. She describes restriction. She describes deprivation. She describes a life in which the physical boundaries of a compound owned by her own family became the total boundaries of her existence. And whether speaking out helped, or made things worse remains a genuinely open question. In a system that punishes public dissent, a system that would later detain women's rights activists even as it implemented women's rights reforms, drawing international attention to a royal family dispute could be perceived not as a legitimate plea for help, but as an act of defiance. The tool of resistance may have tightened the trap. And then there is the silence of the broader family. The Al Saud family reportedly numbers several thousand princes and princesses. It is among the largest royal families in the world, with members occupying governorships, ministerial positions, military commands, and business empires across the kingdom and beyond. Within that vast network of wealth, influence, and political power, not a single senior member publicly intervened on behalf of 4 confined women. No half-brother stepped forward. No uncle used his influence. No cousin with ministerial authority raised the issue in any forum accessible to the public record. This is not necessarily proof of indifference at the individual level. It is proof of a system. Publicly challenging the king's household decisions within the Al Saud family meant challenging the king himself. The family's internal code treated disputes as matters for private resolution, not public confrontation. Intervening for 4 confined daughters meant risking one's own standing, access, and position within a hierarchy where proximity to the king determined everything. In a family of thousands, 4 women reportedly found no public champion willing to pay that price. That left one remaining possibility for change: the king's death. Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud died on January 23, 2015, at the age of 90. He was buried in Riyadh in an unmarked grave, in accordance with Wahhabi Islamic tradition that forbids elaborate tombs or grave markers to prevent the veneration of the dead. There is an involuntary symmetry in that custom. The king who reportedly ordered the confinement of his own daughters was, in death, stripped of physical monument by the same religious tradition that governed his kingdom's legal and social order. His grave carries no name carved in stone. His daughters reportedly remain behind compound walls. King Salman bin Abdulaziz succeeded his half-brother. Born on the 31st of December, 1935, Salman was a senior figure in the royal family with decades of experience in governance, including nearly 5 decades as governor of Riyadh province. The succession was orderly. The kingdom's institutions continued without disruption. And according to available reporting, the 4 daughters' situation did not significantly change. This is the most devastating reversal in the story. The confinement did not end when the man who reportedly ordered it died. It had either become embedded in the institutional machinery of the royal household, maintained by security protocols and administrative routines that continued operating without fresh instructions, or it was sustained by deliberate decision under the new reign, or it persisted through the sheer bureaucratic inertia of a system in which no one had sufficient authority, incentive, or political will to reverse a previous king's domestic arrangements. Whatever the explanation, institutional momentum, deliberate continuation, or indifference, the result was identical. The king died. The compounds remained. The rise of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman added yet another layer. By 2017, MBS had consolidated power as the kingdom's de facto ruler, sidelining older princes and centralizing authority with unprecedented speed. He launched a modernization program that included entertainment sector development, tourism initiatives, economic diversification plans under the Vision 2030 framework, and, most relevant to this story, significant changes to the guardianship system. On the 2nd of August 2019, Saudi Arabia formally announced that women over the age of 21 could obtain passports and travel internationally without requiring a male guardian's permission. The reform was celebrated globally as one of the most consequential legal changes for Saudi women in the kingdom's modern history. Whether that reform was applied to Abdullah's 4 daughters remains, based on all available public reporting, unclear. The law changed for millions of women across the kingdom. Whether it changed anything behind the walls of those compounds in Jeddah is a question that has not been publicly answered. And the ambiguity is made sharper by the broader contradictions of MBS's governance. The same period that produced guardianship reform also produced the arrest and detention of prominent women's rights activists. The very people who had spent years campaigning for the reforms the government was now implementing. The kingdom was simultaneously expanding women's legal freedoms and imprisoning women who had demanded those freedoms. The 4 daughters of Abdullah existed somewhere in the space between the promise of reform and its selective, unpredictable application. After Abdullah's death, communication from the daughters reportedly ceased almost entirely. The princess's supporters said the women simply disappeared. According to The New Yorker, which published an extensive investigation by Heidi Blake in 2024, based on testimony from a Texas physician named Dwight Burdick, who had served on the king's personal medical detail, the princesses had been kept sedated with combinations of prescription medications. Physicians interviewed for the article described the use of Valium, Ativan, Xanax, and Ambien to keep the women immobilized. Burdick, who said he was initially asked to forcibly sedate Princess Hala after she reportedly went wild with a knife, eventually tried to help the women. He later said he wanted to die with some satisfaction that he had done his best. The reporting described conditions that had worsened, not improved, after the succession. Then the deaths began. On September 30th, 2021, the Saudi royal court announced the death of Princess Hala bint Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. The announcement, carried by the Saudi press agency, gave no cause of death, no further explanation, and no acknowledgement of the circumstances in which Hala had spent the final years of her life. She was approximately 47 years old. A funeral prayer was performed at the Grand Mosque in Mecca. According to her mother and multiple reports, Hala had been confined for nearly 2 decades. She had reportedly been drugged, denied adequate medical care, and cut off from independent contact with the outside world. The kingdom announced her death the same way it would announce the death of any princess, with protocol, brevity, and silence about everything that mattered. Approximately 6 months later, Maha also died. She was reportedly around 50. 2 of the 4 daughters had now died in conditions shaped by years of confinement, without the outside world having been able to independently verify their treatment or their cause of death. The New Yorker reported that Burdick learned of the deaths and felt compelled to speak publicly for the first time, despite the risks. He noted the fate of Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist murdered after entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018. The compound walls that their family had built, that royal security had guarded, and that the guardianship system had made legally impenetrable had become, for Hala and Maha, the boundaries of their entire adult lives and, ultimately, the places where they died. Sahar and Jawaher reportedly remain alive, though their current condition has not been independently confirmed. No journalist has been granted access. No international organization has been permitted to verify their well-being. No government has publicly raised the issue of their safety. The silence that once surrounded 4 women now surrounds 2. The compounds still stand in Jeddah. Their walls were built with royal money. Their guards were assigned by royal authority. Their function was made possible by a legal system that treated adult women as permanent dependents of their male relatives, regardless of age, accomplishment, or desire. The king who reportedly ordered the confinement lies in an unmarked grave in Riyadh, his physical monument forbidden by the religious customs of his own kingdom. The reforms he championed were real. Caste still operates. Women voted in municipal elections. The guardianship system was loosened for millions. 2 of his daughters died before any of it reached them. Whether it has reached the remaining 2 is a question the kingdom has never publicly answered. The recordings Sahar made years ago are still accessible online. Her voice is still audible. A princess of Saudi Arabia describing conditions that sound nothing like a palace. Whether she is still able to record new ones is something no one outside those walls has been able to confirm. The walls remain. 2 women who once spoke from behind them are now silent permanently. And the distance between what the kingdom promised the world and what reportedly happened behind those gates in Jeddah has never been publicly closed.